Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Friday. Happy TGIF. It's 8 minutes after 11 on Friday. Very cold, very wintry. It really feels. Yesterday we got some snow, so it was kind of nice, but it's pretty chilly out, pretty windy. It is definitely signs of winter. Winter is coming. So, but anyway, I hope everyone's doing good. So I'm very excited to talk about this movie that I bought on Wednesday, and I sat down and watched the entire movie last night, and I've been watching the special features that are just awesome. I'm a huge fan of getting a movie. If I'm into a movie, I love to find out all the all the little details on how this movie came about, what the inspiration is. I mean, I'm a nerd first and foremost, but I really love to find out, if I discover a director or a film or even a band for that matter. I just recently got into this really killer black metal band called Ascarom. It's an all female black metal band, and it's a new discovery. And so now I'm like seeking out like some interviews about them, with them, and how they work. I do the same thing with films, and that's why I love special features, because if it's a movie that I'm really into and I fall in love with it, I kind of want to know like how it was put together, the inspiration, how something that, again, I think film is the greatest form of artistic expression. I think it's also the most complex, and it's the most complete and comprehensive as far as expression, because there's so many things that go into that soup of making a movie. It's kind of insane. It's kind of schizophrenic, because you're just, as a filmmaker and just being involved with the production of a film, there are so many things that entails. So I'm fascinated by that. I love to hear like what inspired the film, and all of the ins and outs around it. So I did a show on this movie about 2 weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I've always really loved this movie, but I recently bought it on DVD. Well, actually, I should say I bought it about 6 or 7 months ago on DVD, and I had not seen it in a very, very long time. And I watched it. I did a show on this film a couple of weeks ago, and I was like blown away by it. I'm like, this movie is just amazing. Totally blown away by it. And I was like, I have to buy this on Blu ray, because the copy I have is okay. It's kind of a bad DVD copy. And that movie is The Exorcist 3 from 1990. This movie, I feel, it's a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest sequels, I think, in horror or film history. And the other thing that's miraculous is that it's also a sequel to one of the most, obviously, obviously one of the most iconic horror films ever made, The Exorcist, the original. This movie is amazing in every conceivable way. This Blu-ray package is just incredible. Literally, I was transfixed when I started. I watched this last night, and I was completely blown away by the transfer of this movie on Blu-ray. Again, I have a somewhat decent, kind of crappy version of this film on DVD. It's okay, but this blows that version away about 1,000 times. Literally, it's literally like watching it for the first time. It's so clear. The soundtrack, all of the music is remastered. The transfer of it on Blu-ray is just astounding. And again, it's just, as a collector and as a fan of film, I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, I've seen this movie probably about 10 times. Now I'm going to be watching it. I will be watching this movie to a point of where I lose count on how many times I see it. It's a masterpiece. I think I go as far as saying it's like, well, this morning I saw a friend that I have on Facebook just recently posted. He posts a lot of different movies, and today he did a post on Godfather and Godfather Part 2. Godfather, I've talked a lot about that movie and also Godfather 2, but especially Godfather, being for me my all-time favorite film, and Godfather 2 being one of the greatest sequels of all time. It's one of those cases where the sequel, and I think another example of that is obviously Alien and Aliens, where you have this iconic movie that changes the face of cinema, and then somehow the stars aligned, and then there's a sequel, and the sequel is just absolutely incredible. And I think with Alien, those two Alien movies, and also Godfather, where you can make that argument that that second film, because these are all franchises. The Exorcist is a franchise. All of those films I named are all franchises. And franchises are really hit or miss. I mean, to find consistency in franchises is very hard. But in this case, you can make the argument where the second film or third film in that series is just as good, and in some ways maybe even better than the original. So I think that with The Exorcist 3 in the world of the Exorcist franchise, this movie is just as good, maybe even better. It's so great. The other thing that's so miraculous about this movie is, like, again, the transfer is just, I mean, this artwork. It's got a beautiful slip cover. I bought this on Wednesday. I was super excited. There's so many special features on here. It's awesome. I've been watching a lot of the archival special features. When this movie came out, and this came out in 1990, I never saw an interview. I never saw anything as far as a behind the scenes thing when this movie came out. So it's, as old as this movie is now, it is kind of a game changer. It's such an eye opening experience watching the special features. But there's so many special features on here. There's all the archival stuff that when the film first came out in 1990, and then there's all of this new uh, selections of special features. There's all new. There's new documentaries. There's new interviews. Shout Factory put this out, and Shout Factory did an amazing job with this. This is definitely the best Shout Factory edition I've ever seen. This is now one of my prized possessions as far as being a movie collector. It's amazing. And so the transfer again is just amazing. The other thing that's really cool about this movie is there's two versions of the film which I did not know existed. There's the original theatrical cut which was released in the theater, but then there's a director's cut also, which is funny because I've mentioned it before where typically if I have the option to watch a movie that I really love or a movie that I get into that I eventually really get into or fall in love with it for the first time, there's a director's cut or an extended cut. I usually 9 times out of 10 always go with the director's cut. With the Alien films, the director's cut for both of those films I think are superior than to the theatrical versions. And there's other examples of that too. I usually always go for that because I feel like there's no cuts, there's no limitations on time. For various reasons, there's cuts made for a theatrical release. Sometimes around the gore factor or the length of the film. Making a film, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so there's a lot of pressure. So sometimes that happens with kind of the final version of the film that goes to the public. So 9 times out of 10, I always go for the director's cut. But the interesting thing is, I started watching a director's cut of The Exorcist 3, and I thought it was interesting, but I didn't like it. So when I sat down last night, I started watching. I'm like, oh wow, there's two versions of this film. I will probably eventually watch it, but I was like, okay. And I just watched this film, like a week ago or so on DVD. So I was like, oh okay, sweet. There's a director's cut. So I started watching it, and it's radically different than the the theatrical version. And I have to be honest, I didn't like it as much. It wasn't a lot of the things felt like it was tagged on, and it did a little too much kind of explanation for things. Like right away, there's like these weird. There's a one sequence in the beginning of the film where there's like this weird kind of voiceover thing that really kind of took me out of the film. And the thing that's weird about this, the director's cut, is it feels like it's not really the director who made. It felt like it was Shout Factory that, or the people who decided to re-release this film, the company that decided to re-release this film, assembled all of this footage and made a kind of a remix of this film. And I didn't really like it. It's pretty pale in comparison to the theatrical release. The theatrical release is way more mysterious. It's not so. There's a lot less. It's more of a slow burn, and I like that. Less is more. This movie was directed to by William Peter Blatty, who wrote the original Exorcist novel, which is an incredible book. I read the original novel many years ago. He was also, when William Friedkin directed the original, he was also really involved with that film. He was on set. He was like a script supervisor, I believe. I think he might have even been a producer or co-producer, but he was very much involved with that film. But the extraordinary thing about this movie, and I really don't know of any other examples of this or of that. He wrote the the book that this movie is based on. Originally, they were gonna him and, and William Friedkin were gonna make this film. They came up with the story, but then he decided to William Peter Blatty, which I did not know, decided with this with these ideas he had for a third film, he decided to make a novel out of it. And the book came out, and the book was very successful. The original novel was a mega blockbuster, as well as the film. I mean, huge. So, very interesting. And when Exorcist 3, the book came out, Legion, it was also very successful. And I remember reading that book as a little kid, and I just, or actually in high school, because it came out in 1990, and I was in high school then. I was like maybe a freshman in high school when this came out, so long ago, but it was just an awesome book. And I remember when this movie came out, I felt like this was such a great adaptation, even at a young age, of that book. But the extraordinary thing is like, and again, I don't think I am. I've heard of this ever happening really before in film history, where not only did William Peter Blatty write the book, The Exorcist 3, but then he decided to direct this film, and he also wrote the entire screenplay, which is insane because he's like did all of these major jobs, but then he also takes on that insane job of directing his own film, directing his own work, bringing it to the big screen. And there's some really great interviews with him on here that is just super fascinating. It's I love how this movie, George C. Scott is just incredible in this film. The cast for this movie again is just really awesome. Um, George C. Scott, incredible, iconic actor. Jason Miller, Brad Dourif, who is just so amazing in this film. Best known, most well known probably for The Child's Play. He was Chucky. Ed Flanders, another incredible actor. Nicole Williamson, and Nancy Fish. Amazing cast. Amazing cast. This film is really, it's so different. The thing that works for this movie, because I mean, how can you not love The Exorcist? I think The Exorcist, the original Exorcist, is one of the greatest horror films ever made. It's Some people look to that film as being the scariest movie ever made. I think it's one of the, definitely, if you had to pick your top five or top 10, like legitimately scary films that, like going, seeing a film and it's actually like just rough and raw and nasty and generally terrifying. I think the original Exorcist is easily one of the scariest movies ever made because it's just so raw and visceral. And so, to follow that, is an unbelievable task. They talk a lot about on the special features in the special features on here, on the sequel that came out, the Exorcist the Heretic, which was the sequel, which is just a god awful movie. It's got to be one. It's a really weird situation when you think of like where I think Heretic, The Exorcist Heretic, arguably is possibly the worst sequel in film history. But then The Exorcist 3 came out after, and it's one of the greatest sequels ever in film history. It's crazy. But they talk about, the filmmakers and people around this film talk about The Exorcist Heretic and how just it brought a whole, basically a whole new meaning to like the idea of a misfire and just totally driving something off the train tracks. It's astoundingly terrible. And so for them to bounce back with something that is so original, the other thing that really works for this film is it does, obviously, it very much stays true to what William Friedkin established in the original, but they do something so unique with this film. William Peter Blatty really does something unique, and approaches this film so differently. This movie is a very slow paced kind of murder mystery film. That's the thing that I love about it. It's definitely a horror film. It has an incredible climactic ending that is full on horror, but all up until that point, it's actually a very subtle film in a lot of ways, and it's kind of a slow burn. But initially, it's really a murder mystery film centered on kind of the hunt for a serial killer, which I think is so interesting and was such a great way to dive back into this world and give the audience something new. This movie is very mysterious. It has some of the greatest atmosphere ever made, I think, in a horror film. It's very suspenseful. There are moments. This film actually, I think, has one of the most terrifying sequences ever in film history. One of the most iconic, well done scenes that I've ever seen in a movie. Period. Utterly terrifying, and the the way the pace of this film is it just oozes atmosphere. It's a slow burn. The characterization is really great. All of the writing for this film is just impeccable. It's got a lot of layers to it. It has a lot of depth to this film. There is a lot of information to digest, which I think is really great. I also feel like kind of similar to the first Exorcist, where it's got a lot of heart, it's got a lot of depth. There's a lot of text and subtext to the film, metaphor. So, upon numerous viewings of these films, and especially Exorcist 3, I think you can really get new things out of it because it's got some it's got some depth to it. It runs pretty deep. It's not just a glassy surface or, transparent that way. And it's got this, it's got these acts to the film of where, again, it's a really great crime or murder mystery film with incredible characters. It's really, the atmosphere for this movie is amazing. The film score is great. The cinematography is just gorgeous. There's all there's all of these great scenes that where they really utilize not only the atmosphere, like I said, but the use of shadows. And but then it has one of the greatest kind of payoffs too. It's also, it goes full bore into horror mode by the third act, which I think is really awesome because there's such a build up. And you can also make the case by watching this movie, that it is a thriller. That it you know because the supernatural elements of this film are so subtle throughout the first and second act, which just gives enough air of mystery and suspense and creepiness that you could also view this film as, well, maybe this isn't really a horror film per se because it doesn't have a lot of those tropes. It's not overt. I love the subtlety of this movie, and it's such a slow trickle, and it's centered on these characters. Some of the characters in this film are carried over from the original, and it's such a great timeline. The Exorcist 3 takes place 15 years after the original. So it does such a great job with like being really cohesive, giving you some answers to the questions that you have, but then also giving you all kinds of room to use your own imagination to also interpret what is happening or where things are going. It's never heavy-handed. It's never telling you where it's going to go. I love also that this film is not predictable in any way. And again, it's one of those things which I think are pretty vital and key and pretty key to like making a successful. If you're going to follow such an iconic movie, I mean that's such an incredibly daunting task. So being able to find and strike that balance between paying homage and staying with the original established world, but then giving the audience something new, taking them on this new journey. There's that fine line, and this film just completely exemplifies it in every way. Yeah, it's 1990. If you haven't seen this movie, it's an utter masterpiece. Just as good as The Exorcist, the original. And in some ways, I don't know, I almost like this. In some ways, I like it better because of the suspense factor to this movie. And it's so subtle. Amazing. Amazing movie. Can't say enough good things. And again, this is now easily one of my top purchases in my collection as far as Blu-rays and editions. I am going to finish the rest of the special features tonight. So, amazing, amazing film. Definitely the Blu-ray, my favorite Blu-ray that I've bought definitely the best Blu-ray I have bought in recent time. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.